Bienvenidos a True Conversation, el podcast bilingüe que te ayuda a conocer y comprender las tendencias educativas de hoy a través de conversaciones claras y sencillas. Mi nombre es David Lozano. He formado parte de la educación desde 1999 y puedo afirmar que el cambio es una constante al educar. Esos cambios, poco a poco, me frustraban y en ocasiones me sentí incapaz de enseñar. Pero para mi fortuna, logré encontrar a personas que a través de conversaciones me ayudaron a superar obstáculos y lograr encontrar el cómo sí. Hoy yo quisiera ser parte de tu cómo sí y con este podcast espero lograrlo. Pero en este viaje no voy solo. El día de hoy quiero presentarles a Nancy Reeves. Licenciada en Letras y Filosofía, tiene una maestría en Español de la Universidad de Penn State y una maestría en Inglés de la Universidad de Louisiana en Monroe. Además, estudios postdoctorales en investigación y currículum en la Universidad Panamericana. Ha sido profesora en diferentes ámbitos académicos, desde primaria hasta nivel universitario en diferentes países. Al igual, ha dado conferencias en diferentes localidades a través del planeta y ha trabajado en la creación y asesoramiento de programas académicos en diferentes instituciones. Ella se unió a la familia de Pearson PLC como especialista de producto para Centroamérica en 2017 y actualmente trabaja como coach académico para México y América Central. Y para acomodar la preferencia de nuestra invitada, this podcast is going to be on English today. Nancy, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure, Nancy. Nancy, quick question for you. What's your favorite drink?
Well, that's not a fair question. You know the answer. Coffee.
I may know the answer because I am blessed to have known you and worked with you several times, but I still would like for our audience to know, what is your favorite drink?
Coffee. I'm addicted
Coffee.
to coffee. I live for coffee. I work for coffee. Coffee.
You're not addicted. You are a coffee aficionado. Remember that. Never say addiction in a public broadcast. All right, so
okay.
coffee. Now, Nancy, you've been in education since 1996, if I remember correctly.
Yep. I've been teaching since 1996.
So you've been a teacher, but have you heard other positions other than a teacher?
Yes, I've actually been curriculum director, special education program director. I've been curriculum coordinator. I've been an advisor for university students. What else? Oh, I've been translator. I've actually worked for the DA's office, translating cases.
Okay.
Lawyers, a lot of lawyers. And
district attorney of what state?
Louisiana. I worked in a couple of cases in specific states.
Louisiana. No, I can't say a lot. I know. No, full disclosure. But yeah. Louisiana. So you've been to the Bayou.
Yep, of course. That's where my family's from.
How do you feel about jambalaya?
I miss it. I
miss it.
I miss etouffee. I need to make some etouffee, and I'm actually hoping to make some etouffee.
Well, if you ever do, I hope I'm around so I can get a taste of it. All right. So you've been in education, not just as a classroom teacher in front of students, but a support to teachers as well, university professor, and you've done quite a bit around the block in regards to education. And yep. I know, but our audience doesn't know, that this hasn't just happened in one country. You've actually done this in several countries. What are some of the countries of the world that you've worked as an educator?
Well, I've been very lucky. I'm very fortunate to work in England. I worked in the States. I worked in, of course, Guatemala. I've taught classes in Panama. Recently, I taught a unit course there. And of course, I've been able to do a lot of teacher training throughout Latin America. I've gone to Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, trainings in Argentina, in Chile, Central America, all over Central America, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and of course,
Mexico.
Of
because
course.
you've been in Mexico. That's where we got a chance to work together and present a conference together. I remember. All right, so you've been around the block and you have firsthand experience on different education systems, both public and private, in different countries of the world.
Mhm.
What is
Yes.
one thing that you would say is a commonality in all of those different educational systems you've been part of?
One of the top ones.
Sure.
Uh, well, teacher burnout is a huge one.
Okay.
Teachers don't necessarily know how to work with the students. Education is limited within its resources. Government don't take it seriously in the investment that they give to educational institutions in the public sector. Private sector, they, of course, the prices are a little bit too high for all the parents, so it's not accessible. And that theory of education for all, it's good in practice, it's good in theory, but in practice is very limited because of that of finances for parents.
I'm going to grasp one of the things that you just mentioned, this theory of education for all. Much more than the socio-political ramifications of it. In pure educational terms, do you believe that we can educate everybody in the same way?
Not necessarily. You can educate everybody. For instance, you can teach every English to everybody, even students with diagnosis. The only thing is that the way in which a person learns is different. Everybody has a different rhythm. When it comes to learning a topic or developing skills, some students are going to be better whenever they acquire a language than others. Also, they're going to be more comfortable. The environment is going to have a lot to, a huge influence in them. So you can do it, but you do have to understand that everybody has a different rhythm and you have to respect that rhythm. So you have to accommodate. I know the term differentiation, a lot of people, you know, retire of it. I get it to some point because like, how am I supposed to differentiate when I have like thousands of kids and I used to have classes of 70 students in my at the uni.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so how can you do differentiation in those scenarios? But in reality, if you care, you will try your best to accommodate to some extent.
All right. So if I'm listening correctly to what you're saying, we can teach concepts or knowledge to everybody across the board, but there are differences that will appear because we all learn differently. Some of us have different learning styles, some of us have different learning speeds, and some of us have different learning preferences. So we cannot use the tagline one size fits all in education.
Exactly. You
All
cannot
right.
use exactly the one size fits all doesn't work.
All
But you
right.
can there's this book that I was actually reading, which I loved it. It was called Bilingualism Matters. And in this book, the perception of the author was that yes, everybody, Maria Garaffa, um, that everybody can learn a language because everybody can, and I can prove it because I do have a son with special needs. They learn the languages, they develop the skills, but it's a different way. There's not a perfect system for everybody. You can accommodate, you can find strategies. The content is something that you can provide to the students, but you have to find ways in which you present this content. You have to be creative as a teacher to do so. You have to allow the student also to develop their critical thinking in order for them to really comprehend and make those connections with it. Creativity is a huge role in education, and
Oh,
the we have forgotten about it. We
I,
have
I,
really forgotten about the fact of we need to be creative and we need to let our students be creative.
I hear echoes of Dr. Ken Robinson in what you're saying right now, that through his work, I remember the first time that I watched his TED talk on how schools create creativity and how the educational paradigm should change because it's still the same that was created at the end of the first industrial revolution. And as long as I remember, you can fact check me if I'm wrong, but I remember one like on the fourth revolution right now. So our educational paradigm is still back on the first one. But I'm gonna zoom in on something that you've been implying as you share this information with me. when we teach, we don't just, and by we I refer teachers. Teachers don't just walk up to a classroom in the morning and come up with what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it at that instant, in that second. I'm pretty sure experienced educators may seem that way to outside observers, but education is not something that you can do on the fly or that you can pretend that you know what you're doing because eventually it's going to make sense. It takes preparation. Are there any current educational philosophies that, from 1996 in your case, 1999 in my case, to today, 2024, are there any educational philosophies or paradigms that you say, oh, this is how we were teaching back in the 90s, and this is how we were teaching in the 2000s and 10s? And have they changed, or are they still like, this is the one you would still use?
I think it's transition because we're still very traditional in our teaching style. Of course, everybody's still with constructivism. Everybody follows that one. That's the most important one. That's the one that everybody talks about. Of course, taxonomies, we stick with Bloom taxonomy, and everybody follows Bloom's taxonomy. But I think right now we're having a conflict because we're having the role of AI coming into place. And we cannot deny what's happening because the way that we need to approach it is a constructivism approach in the sense that we need to build the knowledge of students about how to use technology, how to use Windows, how to start working from the basics, and then really start focusing on being more concrete into the manipulation of AI, because AI can help the student and can be a substitute teacher. It can be that tutor that they need, and it can consist the new system. But we do need to alter our traditional strategies and come up and move into a new system, leave the old things behind that don't work anymore, and adapt a new system for our students. Because our students are, of course, if we look into the generation that we have, which is the generation Alpha, they're the screenagers, right? They are born with technology. They have the big flat screens at home. They most likely have a cell phone or two cell phones, plus a tablet, plus a flat screen. They have everything. And we didn't. And
not only that, we currently have students in the classrooms that don't know a world without a smartphone, with fast speed internet. I enjoy when I have conversations with my peers of age, in that we realize that we grew up, or well, we were born analog, but then we grew up digital. And you were saying a couple of minutes ago, how a teacher, much more than the educational philosophy that you follow in the classroom or that you were presented in your teacher preparation program. But you mentioned something like, we need to learn how Windows work and then take it from there. You're talking about digital literacy, because nowadays it's not just about speaking and writing in a language, but knowing how technology works. And how do you feel, or how important would you mark on a range from 1 to 5, 1 being not important at all, it doesn't matter, and 5 being you have to do this, that a teacher learns about digital literacy?
6.
6.
I
Okay.
think right now, in order for us to be successful, we need 4 things.
Okay.
Well, we need hard skills, of course. We need content. We need soft skills. We totally need the aspect of soft skills about communication, critical thinking. The forces, you can put them all in that one, and the 21st century ones.
Okay.
I think literacy, in the sense of, well, digital literacy is important. I think I would actually even separate it from hard skills. I would even separate it from everything else. I would put it in its own little world and universe. And then I would add this notion of service. This also this aspect of people become too self-involved within this world of digital, all these digital components, that people don't care. You can see somebody fall in the middle of the road and you take a picture, you take a video, you don't do anything for them. So the notion of really taking out and having empathy, or the notion of service, of helping another human being, that pure aspect of being a human. You know, it's something that we need to recover, and we've lost it. And it's so sad because, you know, I just had this wonderful experience this past weekend, and it was so interesting how I had no access to technology, no access whatsoever. And I was in Galapagos, and the harmony in which humans coexisted with animals, in which actually you had to respect the animal's environment and you had to follow and you cannot invade their space, was so fantastic because it just showed a different dynamic. And whenever you saw the animals, how there was a specific moment when there were two bluebird boobies,
Mm-hmm.
and the father was taking care of the baby, and then whenever the mom came, they took turns into who was taking care of the baby. And it was so rational and it was by instinct. And you know, the way they communicate, you don't think that animals will do that, right? So, and then I saw sharks, and they didn't attack me. They just were there swimming in their own little thing.
In their own environment.
Yeah, and you didn't, and they knew that they were safe because no one will harm them. So the fact that you can live in harmony, it's actually something doable
Mm-hmm.
and respectful, and the fact that everybody was there for the service of the animals. It was
I
so
sorry to interrupt you. I think that at the base of what you're mentioning, it's that it can be learned. It's learnable. So if we can learn to be in service of others, if we can learn about digital and non-digital literacy, if we can develop our soft and our hard skills, then that's like a pathway to being successful, not just today, but in the future. So that leads me to ask you, do you think in your professional experience and opinion that we are slowly moving towards a future in which the development of skills will be prioritized over knowing things? Like knowledge is always going to be important, but knowing how to put that knowledge into practice, is it something that you see coming?
Yeah, I actually think that a lot of people, and don't get me wrong, I'm all about, hey, I went to uni, I went to university, I study a lot. But I also can see that there's going to be a change in that dynamic. People that are into academia, academia, they're going to go to university and do the research and do the work, and more power for them, or to them. But there's also going to be that aspect of, if you can learn something and if you're open and you're flexible enough to learn something, you're going to be successful, because it takes that attitude of wanting to learn, of wanting to change, because technology can help you achieve your goals. Technology, if you know how to write a proper prompt, if you know your skills, you know your writing skills, you know how to, you know, tell the prompt what to do, you know how to instruct it, then you're going to have an ally there. You're going to have someone to help you build what you need to build. So you're going to coexist with technology, and we need to learn to coexist and not be afraid of it. A lot of people are terrified of technology, but I think what we actually need to do is to coexist with it.
You mentioned something that I find incredibly interesting as an educator myself, because you very easily segued into artificial intelligence and how by coexisting with that specific technology, we can move forward based on this shift in the way we do things that you see coming. But you mentioned something that I want to grasp upon, because you mentioned prompts. Now, for everybody in the audience who's not as familiar with artificial intelligence as Nancy and I, when you interact with generative AI like ChatGPT or Google's new AI, the Copilot from Microsoft that's in Gemini for Google, Copilot for Microsoft, whenever you interact with any form of generative AI, you have to write a prompt. And this prompt is the way you communicate to the AI what you want it to generate for you. In the writing of the prompt, we are seeing an emergence of and this connects back to what we were talking in the beginning, we see an emergence of how important it is to actually know how to write correctly in the language that you're trying to communicate with the prompt, because differently from another human being who can bring his or her experience with languages into the mix and try to make sense of your prompt when you type it, generative AI requires you to be as specific as possible, because if you're not specific, if the words that you use in the sentence prompt have grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes, punctuation mistakes, then you are not giving the generative AI the information it needs to generate the idea. So instead of helping you, it becomes a nuisance because you want something that in your mind is very clear, but you're not being able to communicate it correctly. So, Nancy, proper grammar, spelling, punctuation, capitalization in any language, not just English and Spanish, vital for interacting correctly with AI, yes or no?
Yeah, actually, even Dan Fitzpatrick said in his book, ChatGPT requires high levels of literacy. That's as easy as I am going to put it. If you do not know how to avoid nuances, if you don't know how to avoid putting expressions at it's a machine. At the end of the day, it's not a human that can make the interpretation, like you said. It's a machine that does coding. It's all about codes, and the codes will give you the results. So by coding, it will mean that you need to make sure that the codes are clear. So, like I said, high levels of literacy, that's the best way to explain it. And even if you have an issue, there's a library called AI for Education, where you can find a prompt library, and that can give you an idea about how to write prompt if you don't know how to write one. The prompts are always requiring the same thing. It's going to be the question, it's going to be the role, it's going to be the parameters, and of course, it's going to be the explicit instructions of what you need.
So what you're saying is that above and beyond grammar, spelling, punctuation, capitalization, all the rules of any language, one can actually learn how to write the correct prompt for AI to do what we need it to do. Mm-hmm. So something that can be learned.
Yeah.
Something that can be taught.
Exactly. Like there's this, oh my God, there's this wonderful thing called Gamma. I've been playing with it. You can build web pages, you can build documents, you can do PowerPoints with it. And the better the instructions, the clearer the language, the results of what it gives you is just fantastic. But you have to know what you're writing. You have to make sure to revise it. And hey, if you don't know your grammar and you have ChatGPT and Grammarly, like I always say, perfect marriage. They always give you the best result.
You heard it, folks. Grammarly and ChatGPT to advance your career further, from the mouth of Dr. Reeves herself. Let me say, though, as we keep moving down this list of topics that I had, because amazingly enough, we're almost done. But one more thing. So we went from, different educational philosophies to literacy, to using good, clear literacy to communicate with AI so AI can help us do our work in a more efficient, better way, which is a pathway to differentiation and accommodation. That those are the kind of things that we need to do in education, but that take a lot of time from the teacher, or sometimes, let's be honest, we don't know exactly how to do them. So AI can be our friend. But before we finish this podcast, I would like to ask you, what about critical thinking? And the reason that I ask you is that I recently saw a webinar where the presenter was mentioning that through AI, we can access critical thinking that we ourselves have not developed yet. Now, some of the people in the audience of that webinar were, as you mentioned earlier, scared about this potential. But I myself find it incredibly useful. As a learner of English as a second language and as a teacher of grammar and composition myself, I still sometimes have difficulties in understanding the author's point of view or author's purpose or the author's voice, particularly of those literary examples that are from a previous 2, 4, 5 generations from mine, or that the context of the story was created in a place and time that no longer exists. So the author in the webinar, the presenter in the webinar, did a wonderful exercise in which he was asking AI, are you familiar with Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven? And AI would say, yes, I'm familiar. All right, so what would Edgar Allan Poe say is the Raven's purpose? And AI started doing a whole analysis on literary analysis, which usually from a human being requires high order thinking skills and hours of reading. And it was analyzed in an instant. And I was reading the analysis, and it was not that far off the mark. It was still not perfect. Obviously, the AI is not Edgar Allan Poe, but when they tried that exercise with individuals who we have much more of their writings, like former presidents or secretaries of state, then the AI got a little bit closer because they have this hundreds of examples of the way they write, the way they speak, the way they think. So can critical thinking be scaffolded by AI? What do you think, Nancy?
That's a very good question.
Hey, I did my research for this.
I know. I think we can put into practice critical thinking, but for me, I always take it in a very philosophical approach.
Okay.
I always get this question about, but we're not working on critical thinking. Everybody's copy and pasting the information. They're not really diving into what it's saying. They're not questioning. I'm like, well, in life, you have to question everything, even what I'm saying, what I'm telling you. I know that I've studied, I know that I read, but we have to question everything. And one of the aspects of you have to have a discussion and debate with the information that the prompt's giving you. Even what you're telling me, all the information about how Edgar Allan Poe will say this, or the information, they have to have a discussion with it. They have to question everything, because at the end of the day, remember that there are components. I would not dare, but that's the word that everybody uses about bias. But the input of information is done by humans. We're the ones that add all this information into the system. So we cannot rely on it 100%. It's kind of like divine inspiration into the system. So it's being put by us, by everybody in there. So we do have to be able to question it at some point, in some extent. That is where critical thinking comes into place. Whenever you question, you really reflect upon the information you're reading, and then you make the choice into believing or not what is there, what is written. So I think, yes, it can be scaffolded if worked and presented properly. But I also, and I do think that critical thinking is something we can work, but it's also something that we need to consider in our teaching practice, because sometimes whenever we teach, we don't really work in critical thinking with our students. We don't challenge our students to question us. And I love to tell my students, question the moment that I even tell you my name, because I might be lying to you. So it's true, you have to always, because I'm going to tell you what I want you to believe. I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to tell you my perception of things, but that doesn't mean that that's the truth. People are not really interested sometimes in the truth.
It's kind of like the saying, sorry to interrupt you, kind of like the saying, like, oh, nobody lies on the internet. You have to double check, triple check some facts.
Pictures, for crying out loud. Everybody uses so many filters that you don't even know who you're talking to anymore. And I was actually reading this thing on LinkedIn about having an avatar being your voice. I don't want an avatar being my voice, but it's going to come to that point in which you're not going to know if you're talking to a real person or an avatar, because people are going to use, especially introverts, they might actually like using an avatar to express their emotions, because that's going to be safer. And people hide behind a screen whenever they make comments on the internet. So
no, it's very similar. I find your comment very similar. To do a parallel to the fact that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were all teaching in a distance learning setting, the percentage of bullying went down because everybody was at home. So it's one of those things that when you look at just at the hard data, it still requires you to delve into it. And that's where critical thinking comes in. All right. So, Nancy, I'm going to say that based on the conversation that we had right now, there were other topics that we might explore in further episodes of this podcast. I will definitely love to have you back. But before I let you go, one of our target audiences for Through Conversations are teachers. You know, teachers of all walks of life, teachers of all types of experiences. You are one of our target audiences. So I have a final question for you. If I were a new teacher, freshly graduated from university, what advice would you give me?
Learn to connect with your students. Learn to learn from your students. The first year, it's hard. It's never perfect. You're going to see and you're going to find stories that you've never been exposed to before. Every student has a story. Learn to be a storyteller. Learn to connect. And don't put so much pressure on you, and don't give up. Because the moment that you give up, you're really damaging a system that is already damaged in a way. So, education is not about the money. It's about the difference that we make every day in a person's life, and the fact that we do have the ability to change a person's life. I never did it for money. I love teaching and I love education because at its core is helping people out. And I love that. So,
All right. Great advice. You know it now, teachers. You have to connect. It's all about those connections. And don't forget about Dr. Reeves' 4 priorities for the future: hard skills, soft skills, digital and non digital literacy, but above all, service to others, and you will do well. Nancy, I thank you kindly for joining me on this very first episode of Through Conversations. I'm definitely going to call you up for another one sometime in the near future. And for everybody who's been listening, thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing us to share with you what we know and what we have heard about. And thank you for joining us in this very beautiful conversation. Nancy, I will see you around, and I will see you, everybody else, some other time. Have a great day.
you too. Bye.